All right, thank you, choir. I've always wanted to be next to a garden gnome. Isn't that awesome? So welcome to Easter morning, a la the Gospel of John. And earlier, if you were paying attention, you might have noticed that the Bible has 4 things. They're called the Gospels. And the names of the Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So we're in John this year, but all 4 Gospels bear witness to Easter morning. All 4 Gospels tell kind of a similar story. It's morning, it's early morning, it's 3 days after a terrible event, and there is a woman or women who are headed to the tomb, probably pretty sad, pretty depressed. They get to the tomb and surprise, Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. So kind of similar stories, but it's always interesting every year to zero in on which gospel we're in and say, how does it diverge a little bit? So, it's 3 days later, it's in the morning, and Matthew says it's early. Mark says it's pretty early, it's before dawn. Luke says, yeah, it's very early. But John says it was still dark. It was still dark. Seems like it's pretty much the earliest witness. Then in each gospel, it's a woman or women. In Matthew, it's 2 women, including Mary Magdalene. In Mark, it's 3 women, including Mary Magdalene and 2 others. In Luke, it mentions Mary Magdalene, Joanna, a couple other people, and there's at least 5, if not more. There's a whole gaggle of women who go to the tomb in the Gospel of Luke. But in John, and you might not have seen it before your eyes, but you might have heard it with your ears. Do you know how many were at the tomb in the Gospel of John? Just 1. Who was there? Mary Magdalene. And then immediately, she kind of seems in a panic. She starts running, it says. No other gospel talks about that. She starts running. And then when she meets the other disciples, what do they start doing? They start running. And then the Gospel of John is kind of interested. They're running. One outruns the other. One arrives first, and then the other comes along. And then later in the story, it says, well, the one who arrived first. As if John's been keeping a timer and keeping track. That's why we handed out medals, so you could keep track. Who got there first? Who got there second? So I would observe that the Gospel of John is the darkest story. I would say the Gospel of John is the loneliest story. And we'd also have to say it's the most athletic, right? Let's dig in a little more. What else is going on in the Gospel of John? There is a lot of weeping. Mary was weeping. And the angels appear. Mary, why are you weeping? And then the gardener / Jesus says, woman, why are you weeping? Oh, so much weeping. I think this gospel has the most emotional turmoil going on. And I wonder if that emotional turmoil leads to distortion in thinking and distortion in seeing. Because Mary, when she comes to the tomb, she jumps to conclusions and says, who's they? They have taken the body and we don't know where. And she uses that term again. They've taken the body. So much paranoia. So that when she sees Jesus, but she doesn't really see Jesus, she sees a gardener, she says, did you take the body? She accuses the gardener of being a thief. But this thief turns out to be her teacher, Rabboni. I was going to teach you the word teacher for Time for Discovery, and I forgot to today. But it's the only gospel witness in the Easter morning that uses the word teacher Isn't that amazing? Our prayer all across Lent was, Lord, teach us your ways. The thief turned out to be the rabbi, the teacher. Pretty incredible. So many things to learn in John's gospel account, Easter morning. Maybe it's in honor of all the athleticism going on in this story. I was reminded of something I've been fascinated in for a few years. I kind of glom together a lot of different concepts, and I call it performance psychology. And I learned about it through sports, through athletes, coaches, teams, just athletics in general, how they use performance psychology to do well in their sport. So, for example, during the Olympics, I was watching those Nordic skiers. Like, was it from literally Norway? Like, how did they keep going in cross-country skiing? And I read about how the downhill skiers use visualization ahead of time to imagine the course. And some of you may remember a few years ago when I got super into performance psychology. Do you remember my Caitlin Clark phase? Anybody? Anyway, I was a little bit, what basketball teams use to think about and, to do well in their sport. So that came to mind today, not just because of the athleticism in the Easter story, but for some other reasons. Just what's the picture in our heads, in our lives? I take the sports stuff or wherever I can get it, and then I try to apply it to, how does this work in nonprofit places? How does this work in healing professions? And then how does this work for me, just to have a healthier mindset for daily life? Well, this comes in handy because across the season of Lent, we were praying that prayer, Lord, teach us your ways. And when I was getting ready for Lent's season, I can remember back in January, I had this vision of disciple means learner. Disciple means learner. And I thought about what can we learn in Lent this year? And then I thought, what is our curriculum for Lent this year? And so then I thought about what John stories we might learn. And then I came upon this thing called peace curriculum. How might we learn peace? So did you notice across Lent we sang songs about peace? We had liturgy about peace. We talked about we shall live in peace. We're going to lay down our sword and shield. And we're not going to study war no more. We're not going to study war no more. And we had that vision from Isaiah of swords turning into gardening tools. Meanwhile, do you know what happened the second week of Lent? The U.S. started a new war. Pretty depressing when I think about it. Here I was thinking we're going to do this peace curriculum. We're going to have a peace liturgy. So inside, we were talking about peace things and learning the Gospel of John. And then look what happened. Another war. It's kind of depressing. Really depressing. But then I think about performance psychology and visualization. And I was led to another thinker from outside the realm of sports. He's actually an anthropologist. His name is Doug Fry, and he studies civilizations. And I think a lot of times we think humans, we're so warlike, we're always making war, we're always fighting, we're always in conflict. But Doug Fry observes that for the vast history of humankind, we're not warlike. So he studied archaeology. He studied nomadic ways. And he's like, usually people are cooperative. Then he looked at mammals, and he said, do mammals kill each other? Only 1% of mammals ever kill each other. And then even apes, with whom we share the most DNA, they only kill each other 2% of the time. We are not wired to kill each other, believe it or not. But sometimes the way we talk and the way we act makes us think we are just a bunch of warmongers. He's like, no, we're actually far more wired to be cooperative and not to fight or flight, but to tend and mend. It's in our bones. It's there. He also studied 16 societies that were a little more peaceful. So pro tips, like what do peaceful societies look like? And he said they're highly cooperative. They have cooperative networks, cooperative economy, and they have a shared goal. I think that this is part of performance psychology. What picture in our heads do we have about the nature of humanity? Are we just, oh, some are good, some are bad, or, oh, we're all just fighters, and then, there's the weak? Or do we embrace what this anthropologist has picked up through very deep research across time? We're not. We're cooperative. Humans in our DNA and in our practice are meant to be cooperative. What story are we telling ourselves? I think the Gospel of John is a book that's helping us to think about what picture is in our heads. What do we believe? How do we act? The people in the Gospel of John, or the writer of the Gospel of John, he lived maybe 10 or more years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And it seems like his understanding of the world was a little darker. They had a lot more instances of persecution and isolation, shall we say darkness and loneliness and fear and emotional turmoil. We'll be reading some of those stories after Easter, just like Mary was experiencing on Easter morning. But the Gospel of John says, yes, dark stuff's going to happen. But what picture do you have in your head? Is it like me, catastrophizing, or is it's going to be better, it's okay, there's still hope. Things can get wiped out, but it's going to be okay. I think the whole Bible is performance psychology. In Isaiah and Micah, they talk about swords and shields and the reality of war, and there's a lot of war in the Old Testament, but he says that the prophets say that those are going to become gardening instruments. It's possible. And in the New Testament, it talks about how Jesus was killed on a cross. Was the cross a gardening tool in the Roman Empire? No, it was an instrument of capital punishment. It was the ugliest, nastiest, most violent, traumatic way to die. But that cross, that was a horrible, horrible thing, now has become a symbol for a religion of hope. It just makes me think we got to look at things. John is coaching us, and the Bible is coaching us. How do you look at things? What picture do you have in your mind? And how easily we can be distorted by trauma, by bad situations, by our own drama, just like Mary was. Even Mary, a perfectly wonderful, top-notch person, had a distortion in her head that made her extra paranoid, accusatory, and even seeing her teacher as a thief. I know plenty of times I look at situations and I'd say, that is a thief. And plenty of situations are a thief of my time, a thief of my soul, a thief of my hope. But I think the Gospel of John, the Bible, is coaching me. What vision do I have? What's playing in my head? What is my ideology? Yes, the reality of evil. But if my next move is despair, evil wins. I have a choice there of seeing the teacher. And it's not like the thief is my teacher, but the situation is teaching me. Maybe it's teaching me, boy, We really do have a violent society, and we need a lot more people to love each other and say there's another way to live. And maybe that's how God's using us, our church, is to say this is real. We're not some pie-in-the-sky impractical thinkers. It's far more practical to love each other than to kill each other. Lord, teach us your ways. Lord, teach us your ways. I was thinking about distortion, that Mary could look and see a thief instead of her teacher. It's the reality of distortions. We all have distortions, that we're unlovable, that something's unsolvable, that we're a mess, that it's all terrible. We all have those distortions. And yet, we in the Bible can see clearly. The resurrection story ends with Mary saying, I have seen the Lord. Resurrection helps us see clearly. It's like this eye chart that says, this is the way of hope, the way of possibility. Hope is not killed. Love is not killed. New life is there no matter what. So I thought of a prayer for us to think about. A prayer that acknowledges, dark stuff happens. And we can get distorted and make it worse. But we can pray, Lord, help me see clearly. Lord, help me see clearly so that I can run my race with greater faith. To God be the glory. Amen.